You're listening to the Footballogists with Kevin Gillikin and the Skipper Dude, covering the basics of sports betting.
You got an extra 2.5 points, so you won the bet 30.5 to 30. That's how point spreads work.
In-depth analysis of every NFL spread.
So Vegas is giving Baltimore with the win and 4 points to do so. Now, I think that's a crazy bet. Baltimore is a really good team. Miami is a terrible team. 4 points is not nearly enough. Baltimore should win by at least 1 touchdown. Easy. Bank it. Bet it.
Plus yearly and daily fantasy football.
Will he be the top fantasy quarterback for a year? No, but Jimmy Garoppolo is going to have a fantastic week 1. He's got all the people around him, and he's playing against a terrible Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense.
All with a focus on the human element.
We're talking about another Belichick disciple in his first year after almost zero experience as a coordinator in the NFL, and he has to somehow manage this quarterback situation with Josh Rosen and Ryan Fitzpatrick. Add that to Rosen's bad attitude and anything else going on in the Miami locker room, and it's just aiming for disaster for the season, for fantasy, for everything for the Miami Dolphins in 2019.
Please gamble responsibly.
I'm Kevin Gillikin. You're listening to The Footballogist. Our show is all about the human element in regards to sports betting or betting the NFL and fantasy football, both yearly and daily. To start the show, we're going to send it over to Skipper Dude, who's going to discuss the basics of sports betting. Now, he did this last show as well, so if you already listened to this segment in our last show, then go ahead and skip forward to the 9-minute 30 mark. Otherwise, we're going to talk about the AFC South. Who are the favorites? Who is going to be the top quarterback in that division? And again, focus on all the human element and the injuries, the coaching staffs, and what's going to take these teams to the next level. And we're going to decide if we are going to buy or sell the mark of the total win mark set by Tipico, and in general by the Vegas betting system. Skipper Dude, up first.
Thanks, Kevin, for having me on and asking me to do a little overview of how NFL gambling works. I think this should be fun. So first of all, if you've ever been to a casino and you know how a casino works, you know that casinos don't actually make their money gambling. Casinos make their money facilitating gambling for others like you or me. If you play blackjack or craps or roulette, the casino is taking the other side of bets that you're laying down, but they've openly rigged the odds to where they will always win over time. Maybe not on 1 or 2 or even 10 particular gamblers, but with hundreds of thousands or millions of gamblers making what probably amount to hundreds of millions of bets, they will always win. The odds of every roll or every hand is very slightly in their favor, and that's what they count on over time to make money. Now, live poker, and I'm not talking about poker machines, but actually live poker, is a little different. Casinos are not involved in betting at all with poker. They're simply dealing the cards and taking a small cut of every hand or of the action. Some poker players will win big, others will lose big, but casinos will always take a very small cut on every game, and those wins, those cuts over time are what help make them rich. Now, sports gambling from a casino perspective is kind of a hybrid between blackjack and poker. So technically, when you make a bet, you are betting against the sports book. But the job of the sports book is to see to it that an equal number of dollars, not bettors, but dollars, are being bet on both teams. That's where they make their money. Now I'll explain. So let's say there's a game, hypothetically, in 2019, actually, this will come up, with Miami at New England. Okay, on paper, this is going to be a total blowout. Now, if casinos were to just take a bet on who will win this game, 98 or maybe even $99.50 out of every 100 are going to be bet on the Patriots. And when, as is likely, the Patriots win, it would leave a disaster for the casino. So they can't take that bet. Remember, casinos make their money little bits at a time when equal number of dollars are bet on both teams. And here's how they do it. So They have two different ways of evening things out and making the betting on both teams roughly equal. The first is called the point spread. Now let me switch over to a real life Week 1 2019 game, and that's the Broncos at Oakland to play the Raiders. The Raiders are the favorite in the game, so to make the betting equal, casinos basically gift the Broncos 2.5 points, which is what they've done. So let's say the Raiders win that game 30-28. The Raiders won the game, but from a betting perspective, if you took the Broncos, you got an extra 2.5 points, so you won the bet 30.5-30. That's how point spreads work. Now, when you made your bet and you took the Broncos and the 2.5 points, you probably saw a line of -110. What that means is that you needed $110 to win 100. That's the -110. Now, to make the numbers here a little easier, we'll just say $11 to win 10. The guy who took the Raiders and gave up 2.5 points, he also had a line of -110, and he also bet $11 to win 10. So combined, the two of you bet $22, 11 plus 11. You won the bet, so you won 21. You won your original $11 plus the 10 that you won, the 11 to win 10. The Raider better got nothing. So the two of you combined bet $22. You got 21 back. Where did the extra dollar go? The casino kept it as a service fee. That's how they make their money. Now, the other standard way to bet on football games is what's called the line. It's fairly similar to the -110 I just discussed above, except that with the line, there is no point spread, and to win your bet, you only need your team to win the game. Now, it gets a little bit more complicated, the numbers do, but let's go back to the Broncos at the Raiders. The Broncos are a +125 to win that game, and the Raiders are a -135. What that means is that if you want to bet on the Broncos, a $100 bet on the Broncos will win $125, and a $135 bet on the Raiders will win $100. Okay, that's how lines work, and basically the same type of thing on that spread between 125 and 135. That's where Vegas makes its money. All right, so now beyond the basics, casinos also try to spice things up with bets like parlays, where you pick anywhere from 2 to about 10 or even more games, and you win money based on the number of games that you win. You actually have to win all of the games, and if you win them all, that's why it's called a parlay. You win multiple times your money. So let's say you picked 2 games and won them both. You'll win 2 times 2, or about 4 times your money, less the casino take. If you picked 5 games and won, you'll win 2 to the 5th power. You'll win 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, or 32 times your money. In real life, it's usually closer to about 30 times your money because, the casino is going to get its take. But you get the idea. So finally, I want to make a quick admonishment if you're considering betting on NFL games. I spent 2 NFL seasons in Las Vegas trying to win money betting football in addition to my regular job. And it is a whole lot tougher than you think. On paper, you actually only need to win 52.5% of the time. That's a calculation I did a while back in order to make money, but it's so much tougher to do that, it's hard to even imagine. In fact, the better I got at analyzing games during those 2 seasons, the worse I actually did betting. And I kind of learned how extremely far away I was from being able to forecast games well enough to make money consistently. For me, I got to kind of where I was like a scratch golfer betting wise. Pretty decent, but I was nowhere near being a PGA pro and nowhere good enough to make money consistently, because it's only those PGA pros of bettors who are going to actually make money consistently. So, as entertainment, sports gambling can be a ton of fun. I love it. It can help amplify the fan experience on game day and just make for a lot more adrenaline in watching the NFL. But as an addiction or as a money-making career, just don't go there. Just don't. Have fun with it and keep things in moderation. Kevin, back to you.
Okay, what a division it is today we're going to cover. It is one of the most fascinating divisions in all of football, and one that is exceedingly hard to predict, especially right now. Obviously, as we all know, Andrew Luck is questionable to start the season. He's questionable to play at all. No one really knows what's going on with Andrew Luck, and that's really a problem, obviously, in terms of betting. Now, when you have one of the top players in football, especially one of the top players in the division, it obviously changes the entire scene. It changes everything, because if it's not Luck and it's Brissett as the backup, they are obviously not going to be the favorites going into play in these games against their divisional opponents, which changes everything. Again, it could make the Texans the favorites, even the Jaguars could be the favorites, and so I want to put a disclaimer before we really start the show and say, until we know if Andrew Luck is healthy, everything is harder. I would almost stay away from every single bet in this division, because we just don't know what's going to happen. Now, that said, we're still going to do our best. I'm still going to give you some buys and sells, which I think I can see. And a lot of this is assuming that Andrew Luck at most will miss 1 or 2 games. But we don't know. We really don't know. We don't know if it's a serious injury or if it's just something they're being careful with. He's been a guy who's been injured his entire career kind of fairly regularly. And so hopefully it's not a big deal. Hopefully he comes back even before, or he comes back for week 1. But until we know, be a little bit careful with betting anything in the AFC South. Still, we're going to give it our best. We're going to go through each team and discuss the human element. Again, this means we're going to talk about injuries. We're going to talk about new coaching staffs, new schemes, perhaps drama in the locker room, guys who are holding out, things that are going to affect the people. Now, in the regular season, we're going to bet each game against the spread every week. So all the games, all the weeks, we're going to bet against the spread as set by Vegas. Now, that means that, you're not just betting. If you just listen to the Skipper Dude, you'll understand what that means. You're betting against a line, not just who's going to win. So they'll say Tennessee and the Colts are playing, and the Colts, they predict them to win plus, or, giving them 5 points, which means they have to win by at least 5 if you bet on the Colts. If you don't quite understand sports betting, go back and listen to the Skipper Dude again, because he has a really great segment before this one, obviously, about how that all works. And again, we're betting the human element, because I've spent some time betting on sports, both NFL, baseball, basketball, and even soccer over here in Europe. And I've had a really hard time basing it off of stats and basing it off of the numbers and basing it off of what the experts say. Because if you win even 50% of your bets, you're a fairly good gambler, which obviously is not a good way to make money. And I will echo what Skipper Dude said in being careful in how you bet. Don't go waste your money. This is really hard, but it can be really fun. I mean, I usually bet $1 at a time, because for me, it makes it fun. It gives me a little more, oomph into the games, but it's not something that's going to ruin my bank account. So be a little careful with that. And yeah, let's get into it. We're going to start with the Tennessee Titans of the AFC South. The Titans are a really interesting team in the last 3 or 4 years, really since they got Marcus Mariota at quarterback. Their first year with him was really rough. I think they won 4 games, but in the last 3 years, they've gone 9-7. So in 2016, 17, and 18, they've been 9-7. So they've been really that perfect mediocre team. They're right on the edge always. They're always almost there, but they can't quite finish it. They can't quite get over that hump. This year, Tipico, who I'm still using as my line, they're the ones I'm taking these lines from, because I'm in Germany, and that's what's most easily available. They're a very good website, and they have the Titans at 8.5 wins, which means, again, if we bet 9 wins, if we bet the over, then you can take money. So they're betting that they will not win more than 8 games. So that's what we have to decide. Do we think that the Tennessee Titans can win 9 games or more, or do we think they will win 8 or less? If we think 9 or more, then we'll buy. If we think 8 or less, then we will sell. And we'll do the same for each team in the division. So again, with the Titans, they're at 8.5 wins this year. That's predicted by Tipico. And in the last 3 seasons, they went 9-7. So it's like, okay, well, if you're looking at the averages, obviously you're going to think that 9-7 is a pretty good prediction and that you would buy it. But obviously then you have to look at the rest of the team and say, okay, are they going to take a step forward, a step backward, or are they going to maybe remain around the same? Now, Mariota, as always, the quarterback is the most important part of any team. This is a team that they put a lot of their future into Mariota 4 years ago, and he hasn't really come through. He's not bad. He's an okay quarterback, but he's typically down near the bottom of QBR rankings. Last year in 2018, he had a QBR of 53.2, which was 20th overall, so not terrible, but in the second bottom half of the list. QBR is a stat that comes from ESPN, by the way. It kind of adds together a bunch of different stats of even passing, running, etc. for the quarterbacks. It's one of my favorite quarterback stat systems, I guess. And he was 20th overall, so not great. He was the second worst passing, so his QBR in passing was second worst, only ahead of Josh Allen in terms of starters. So he's not a very good passer. They don't have a very good passing offense, and really they never have. He doesn't have great weapons on the offense. I mean, they're decent. Corey Davis is a guy that we always think is going to be really good, but he never quite steps up to the bat. Delaney Walker is an underrated tight end, but also coming off an injury. So the wide receivers, tight ends, they're not great. The offensive line is a positive. It's a pro. So PFF, Pro Football Focus, ranks the offensive line as the fourth best in the NFL. So again, as we look at it, we see that the quarterback is really a below average quarterback, and there's nothing that should tell us to expect otherwise. There's a reason why they brought in Ryan Tannehill this year as a backup. Tannehill obviously was a starter with Miami for several years, and again, not a great quarterback, he also a bottom half quarterback, but Mariota, this is a prove it year. He's got to do something. He's got to do better than 9-7 or 8-8, and if he doesn't, then you might see Tannehill to see if he can, have more success in the offense. Now, they will potentially have, the ability to be successful because of a good offensive line. Excuse me. As we all know, the big men are hugely important. Now, the quarterback may be the most important, but if they're getting attacked and blitzed and rushed and never get the chance to set their feet, then they're not going to have much success. I mean, we've seen that with the Texans the last few years, who, again, we'll talk about later in the show, and why the Texans might, again, struggle this year, even though they have a very good young quarterback in Deshaun Watson. And again, offensive line is hugely important, and they've got a good offensive line and a good running back. Derrick Henry is really, again, an underrated running back. Last season, he had over 1,000 yards rushing, averaged 4.9 yards per carry. That's really good. That's above average, and he's not getting a whole lot of mentions. I think he doesn't put up really big runs. He's not super sexy, and he doesn't score a ton of touchdowns, or he hasn't. But he's a guy who really could be a really good running back this next year. And again, behind a really good offensive line. Now, the problem is if his quarterback can't step up and become an even average quarterback, then the defenses are just going to stack the line and just stuff the run. And that's what I think has happened in years past, that they've never really been able to have a great offense. The running game's decent, it's good, but they can never take that next step because they don't really have the quarterback. And because they still have Mariota, who's injury prone, he's never been all that good anyway, I'm not buying this offense. Now, the defense is again, it's okay. And then again, if you look into the coaching staff, that's a big thing for me. If the team is learning a new scheme or if they have a new culture in the locker room. Fortunately for the Titans, this is the second year with each coach. Mike Vrabel as the head coach. Arthur Smith actually will be he'll be the first year offensive coordinator, but he was the tight end coach last year and will be working in a similar scheme as Matt LaFleur had last season, he was the offensive coordinator, but moved to be the head coach of Green Bay. Now, there's been a lot of criticism about that, about keeping Arthur Smith, who again is part of the same Matt LaFleur system, because the offense last year was really, really not good. They were bottom 10, bottom 5 even in some categories in terms of offense. So it's not a very dynamic offense, at least it hasn't proven to be. And so to bring back a guy in that same system, I don't love it. I don't think anyone really loves that. Dean Pease is a second-year defensive coordinator, so at least you have the same scheme on defense. So the good thing is that they have that consistency. I'm sorry, they consistency. They are being consistent on in their coaching staff. The players know what to expect. They know what they're getting from their coaching staff. That the atmosphere is set in general, and that's a positive. That's something I take very seriously, and I think that coaching is undervalued sometimes in the NFL. And when you look at New England, they're the perfect example of having great coaches, but also having coaches who've been there a long time and who set the atmosphere, they set everything that happens in that building, and everyone knows what's happening. And it's like us in normal life. We like to be safe. We want to know what to expect, even if we think we don't. We really do. We want to know where we are, where we stand, and that's what consistency brings with coaching staff. So that's a plus. But again, the offensive coordinator, I don't love it. It's nothing new. It's nothing sexy, and they haven't had success with it. So I don't love it. As we said, with this team and really with the entire division, it's so hard to predict because we don't know if Andrew Luck's going to be healthy. Now, the Titans have the 9th hardest strength of schedule. So they're in the top 10 hardest schedules. Part of that is, of course, because they have to play each team in the AFC South twice. And it's a brutal division. It's a really, really tough division with some really good quarterbacks and a couple, we'll see quarterbacks, also a couple pretty good defenses. So it's going to be a dogfight in this division. Now, Tipico, again, has the Titans at 8.5 wins. And when I come to either having to buy it or sell it, honestly, it's kind of a push. This is a bet I just wouldn't take. I just wouldn't take it. I think if I had to, gun to my head, I would say sell it. I'd say they will not win more than 8 games. But I'm really not sure. I think they could be another 9-7 team. I think they could be 8-8. This is not a confident pick for me, and really the whole division isn't great. I would kind of stay away from it. It's an interesting division, but don't bet it. I think unless you're a big time Tennessee Titans fan or a big time fan of the AFC South, just really avoid betting the Titans. For me, it's a push. And again, if I had to bet, then I would bet on them to not win more than 8.5 games. There's just nothing to really tell me that they're going to take that next step on offense. And especially if you bring in a guy who runs the same scheme and he's in his first year as an offensive coordinator, you have the same quarterback who's never really succeeded. Yeah, it doesn't speak well to me. Now, if they take the next step, it'll be because they have the same head coach, the same atmosphere, and because they have a good offensive line and a good running back. But I don't see it either way. Push. Don't bet this game. Don't bet this team. Don't bet the total wins for the Tennessee Titans in 2019. Okay, up next, we're going to talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars. Can they go back to their 2017 days, back to being a dominant team and a great defense in the AFC South, or will they again win only 4 or 5 games like they did last year? We'll go into that after a quick break. So the Titans have been a push for me because they're so meh. They're always They're not good. They're not bad. They're just in between. And that's like the hardest team to bet. And they're the hardest teams to bet week in and week out because you don't really know what they're going to bring. And they could always win, but they could always lose. And that's pretty tough. Now, the Jacksonville Jaguars in 2018 were 5-11, and really the surprise bad team because in 2017, they were one of the top teams in the NFL and one of the scariest teams, partly because of their defense, obviously, and partly because Blake Bortles just somehow put together a good season. Now, that didn't happen in 2018, and he was a Blake Bortles we all know and, don't really love. Now, this year, obviously, the big acquisition in the offseason was the Jags went out and got Nick Foles. Now, think of what you will of Nick Foles, but he is a Super Bowl MVP, a Super Bowl winner, and thought by many, and especially those in Philadelphia, as the savior of Philadelphia. They won the Super Bowl 2 years ago with Nick Foles, and a lot of people attribute that win a lot and specifically to him. Now, as a quarterback, he is really hot or cold. He's had some really good years, some really good games, and he's had some really bad years. I mean, for example, just look at his completion percentage. Now, when he was a starter in St. Louis, I believe he started, maybe 14 games a few years ago, 4 or 5 seasons ago, and his completion percentage was 56.4. That's bad, and he didn't win many games and got run out of St. Louis in a hurry. Now, in 5 games with Philadelphia last season, 2018, he had a completion percentage of 72.3. So, he's a guy no one really knows. I mean, he's had success. He's a Super Bowl MVP, for goodness sake. But he's Nick Foles. I mean, what are we going to get from him? Now, he does have the same offensive coordinator he's seen success with in the past in John DeFilippo. That's obviously a big deal for him. But, I don't know with Nick Foles. He's a big question mark. Is he going to be able to go to another scheme outside of Philadelphia and succeed? Well, he hasn't done it in the past. He's had success in Philadelphia, and he's had success nowhere else. And he's kind of been a guy who's traveled around a bit. Now, he's got to be better than Blake Bortles, I think, but he's not a guy. I should say he is a guy. He's just not that great of a quarterback. Now, I think he's a clutch quarterback. He's a guy who showed that in big games he can be there. But is he going to be able to do it for an entire season? I don't know. Perhaps, but I don't love it. I don't like Nick Foles, and I don't love that they paid him just an unbelievable amount of money because he's never shown that he can be good for a long amount of time. Now, if you look at Nick Foles and his, the guys he's passing to, it's not a great offense. I mean, D.D. Westbrook is their number 1 wide receiver, and last year he only had 717 yards and averaged just 10 yards per catch. That's not fantastic. Now, it's not terrible, but it doesn't blow me away. Their offense, they don't have anyone on offense that just shouts at me as being someone who's going to really succeed this year. Now, I've heard people be very optimistic about this team because they do have a top 5 top 5 defense. And they've been good for a long time, but they're getting older. I mean, especially look at their line. There are a lot of these guys that are getting up in age. Now, they also have some youth, of course. Jalen Ramsey at cornerback is also a very good cornerback, but it's not a defense that screams at me as being unbelievably talented. I think they've lost some guys. I think they're going to be a good defense. I don't know if they're going to be a great defense. Now, we'll see on the field, of course, but in short, the Jacksonville Jaguars, to me, are a team that's going to fall flat on their faces. And Tipico has them at 8.5 wins, just like the Tennessee Titans. Now, that's coming off a 2018 season where they went 5-11. Do I think they can win more than 8 games? Could. I mean, that's the key word. They could. But honestly, this is a team I really think they're going to fall flat. Now, part of it is because they have a coach that is in the hottest seat in the NFL. Now, he has been there a long time. He's in his 3rd season. That's Doug Marrone. But he is really, he's not found a whole lot of success. Marrone, in his years with both the Buffalo Bills and the Jacksonville Jaguars, is 31-35 as a head coach. He's under 500. That's not good. Now, some guys need the benefit of the doubt sometimes. They come in and they take on bad teams. But eventually, if you're under 500, that doesn't speak well to you. Now, the rest of his staff, DeFilippo, he's had some success, and he had some success with Foles, but, what does that mean? I don't know. I mean, Todd Wash is in his 4th season as the defensive coordinator. They were the 3rd-ranked D in the NFL in 2018, at least according to USA Today, and NFL.com ranks the D as the 4th best going into 2019. So their defense should be good, and they do have the same defensive coordinator, thus should be the same scheme. So the defense should be good, at least, maybe even great. But we all know that you still have to have something on offense, and you have to have something that's going to be at least above average to go anywhere. And you have to have a coach that is beloved and respected and gets people to do what he wants them to do. And I don't know if that's Marrone. I think it's very possible that Doug Marrone is going to lose this team. He's going to lose this team. And I think you see guys like Leonard Fournette. First of all, he's injury prone. I think he's a hothead. And I don't know if he's the best character guy. Now, I don't know the guy. I don't know him personally. Maybe he's the loveliest man on earth. But from what I've seen, he's got some attitude issues. And if some of your best players are having issues, now Nick Foles, I've heard the opposite, is one of the better dudes and respected dudes in the NFL. But I think he's kind of more of a quiet guy. So if this team starts off with a tough start, are they going to give up on their head coach, Doug Marrone? Because these guys also read, what's going on in terms of news around the NFL. They read and say, okay, I know that ESPN, CBS, all these guys, Kevin Gillikin in the Footballogists are saying that he's on the hot seat. And I think that does get into players' heads. I think it does. And of course it gets into the coaches' heads. So the coaches have got to be saying, hey, look, I've got to coach really for my job here, maybe for his career, because he hasn't found success in either team he's been at. So that being the case, do you coach differently? Do you coach a little scared? When you coach scared, I think oftentimes you coach to not lose rather than to win. Now, that's not always the case. Maybe Marone will be different, but you do see that. It's human nature that you're so afraid to lose your job, you're so afraid of just losing a game that you make kind of ultra-conservative decisions. And I think that's not a good thing as a head coach. I think you have to be gutsy and you have to make the calls for the best way to win, obviously, each game in and out. Now, they've also got a really tough schedule. They open up at home against Kansas City, and then at Houston. Those are two really tough games. Now, then they play at home against Tennessee. That should be a win. And then they play Denver, Carolina, and New Orleans. Now, that's at Denver and at Carolina. Now, I don't think Denver is a great team, but playing it at home this year, I think they're going to be tough. They're going to be a tough team to beat at home at least. Now, Carolina, they're the same. Now, they're kind of unpredictable. Cam Newton, unfortunately for him, just had a minor injury in a preseason game, which I imagine we won't see him again or any other quarterback for the rest of the preseason. That's a whole nother topic in itself. But that's a tough stretch. I mean, really, you're looking at their first 6 games. You got Kansas City, Houston, Denver, Carolina, New Orleans, and with Tennessee split in there, and you could be looking at a lot of losses. I mean, you could be looking at a 2-4 type of a start. And if that's the case, I think this team gives up on their head coach. I really do. Now, if they can get through the first 6 games, say even at 500, then okay, maybe they have a chance because then they face Cincinnati and the Jets back-to-back. Those are both games they absolutely can and probably should win. Now, but then they go against Houston, Indianapolis, at Tennessee, Tampa Bay, Chargers, Oakland, Atlanta, Indianapolis. That's a tough schedule. And it's the ninth toughest in the NFL. It's not brutal like some schedules you'll see, but it's tough. And I don't think this team has it. I don't think there's anything that shows me that they're going to be something more than just a mediocre team and possibly even a bad team. Now, I know that is really unusual. I think most people are really buying the Jacksonville Jaguars. I am not. Now, I will gladly eat crow if this changes, but tell me where I'm wrong. The offense doesn't blow me away. I mean, nothing is special on offense. The defense, everyone's saying it's going to be great, but I don't know. I think this is a defense that's ready for a regression. Now, we'll see. Maybe that's different, but I think this is actually maybe the best bet in the AFC East, in my opinion, to sell the 8.5 wins. I think the Jacksonville Jaguars do not win more than 8 games in 2019. The good thing is, I bet you that this is going to that there's going to be really good money on Jacksonville Jaguars week in and week out because they're still kind of a darling around the National Football League for some reason. And I think when you have that, people kind of look at them as still being a really good team like they were in 2017 rather than the 5-win team that they were in 2018. And I think that you're going to see each week that they're going to get a decent line, and I bet you they're going to be a team that's going to win fairly consistently, especially to start the season. So the Jacksonville Jaguars are a sell for me. Sell them at 8.5. Buy the under. They're going to win 8 or less games. That's my hot take. That's my favorite take from this show and from the AFC South. The Jacksonville Jags will not win more than 8 games in 2019. All right, up next, we have a team with a very good young quarterback, a very good receiving core, and a very bad offensive line. The Houston Texans after this quick break. So I don't love the Jags. Actually, I really don't like the Jags this year, partly because there's nothing on their team that I love. There's nothing that sticks out to me. There's nothing that's just like, boom, they're going to be good. And it's not the same for the Houston Texans. Now, the Texans obviously were a very good team in 2018. They went 11-5. And surprisingly, Tipico also has them at 8-5. They have 8.5 this year. Their line is to win no more than 8 games. Now, I'm going to talk about why I think that is a very low win mark for them and why I think you should absolutely bet the over. Deshaun Watson is one of my favorite young quarterbacks. Heck, one of my favorite quarterbacks in the NFL. He can really do it all. He's got the arm, he's got the pocket presence, and he's got the athletic ability to make things happen. And I think he's got the smarts, and he is a leader. This is a good dude. This is a guy that I really think his teammates are going to fight for. That's the same for J.J. Watt. I think if you have guys like that on each side of the ball, the team just fights a little harder. People might say that's crazy. Maybe they say, yeah, these are pros. They play as hard as they can every down no matter what. I think that's bunk. Now, I'm not an NFL player. I've never been an NFL player. But I have played sports, and I have just generally worked in different fields. And if you have guys, especially guys who are your leaders, say your managers, that you really like, that stick up for you, that speak the truth, that fight and give it their all, that bleed out on that field, you work harder. You want to work harder. You know why? Because you don't want to disappoint them. It's not just for you at that point. When you are fighting for the collective, you are fighting harder. And I firmly believe that. Now, the players will tell you that's garbage, and I absolutely 100% disagree. It matters. It matters if you have leadership, especially from the quarterback position. And Deshaun Watson is that guy. Now, that's not it, though. The guy's got talent around him. DeAndre Hopkins is his number one receiver, who is definitely one of the top 3 receivers in the NFL, maybe the best. He's an absolute freak of nature. He runs great routes, he catches every ball, and he just flashes with stats and catches and everything every single year. And then you got Will Fuller, who's a great deep threat and a good receiver. They've got a rookie, Kiki Kuti, who is a highly touted guy coming out of college. They're running backs, Lamar Miller and Duke Johnson. You know, they're not sexy, they're not flashy, but they're a solid rushing tandem. Solid. Maybe even good. And so you look at that talent, and you're like, okay, what on earth is Tipico saying with 8.5 wins? Okay, there's 2 reasons why. Number 1, Pro Football Focus ranks their offensive line as the 2nd worst in football. And they were, I believe, maybe the worst in football last year, or maybe the 2nd worst. They're right there, and they didn't really improve. That they went out and got a tackle, but I guess, there's not enough belief that that's going to be enough to get the job done. Now, if the O-line can take a step forward, if they can take that next step, okay, this is a team that could even go very deep in the playoffs, in my opinion. Now, the other reason is because they have the 4th hardest schedule in the NFL, and that's according to CBSSports.com. And as we see again, they've got to play games in the AFC South, which is a tough division. They start the season at New Orleans, at home against Jacksonville, at the LA Chargers, at home against Carolina, at home against Atlanta, at Kansas City, at Indianapolis, at home against Oakland, at Jacksonville. Man, whew, that is a brutal schedule. Brutal. And I think that's those 2 reasons, the offensive line and the schedule, I think that's why you have Tipico in Vegas selling the Houston Texans and having them at 8.5 wins on the season. It's very front-loaded, especially the schedule. It gets a little bit easier after their bye in Week 10, but not much. Jeez. I mean, they played at Baltimore, at home against Indy, at home against New England, at home against Denver, and then you have 3 to end the season at Tennessee, at Tampa Bay, at home against Tennessee. So the good thing for them is that they have 3 or 4 at the end there that should be fairly easy games considering the rest of their schedule. So if they can win those last 4, that means they only need to win 5 of these other games in order to beat the set overall record of 8.5 by Tipico. Now, are they going to do that? We'll see. A lot depends, again, on Andrew Luck. Is Andrew Luck going to be there for their 2 games against Indianapolis? We don't know. If he's not, then they're in good shape. But they don't play Indy until Week 7, so he should be back by then. I think the Chargers are very good. Carolina's good. Atlanta's good. Kansas City's good. You have a lot of very strong offenses. So they're going to put this defense to the test. And we will see just how good their defense is going to be. I think they should be a good defense, but a lot depends on if J.J. Watt can be the freak that he tends to be. Jadeveon Clowney is in a contract dispute and could likely be traded, which obviously is drama in the locker room, but it's also losing one of your most talented defensive players. So we can't take that lightly enough that Clowney could be gone. Now, they still have a very talented defense, but that's really up front. Their secondary is nothing to sneeze at. Bradley Roby is either their second or third cornerback, and as a Broncos fan, I can tell you he's not a great second cornerback. Now, maybe as a number 3, he's solid. As a number 2, no, he's not very good. And so that doesn't put a whole lot of trust in their secondary. And if they're facing these teams, especially to start the season, it's a tough line. But that being said, I still like them. I like that they have, their coaching staff has been there together for a long time. This is their 5th season, almost all completely together. Bill O'Brien is in his 5th season as head coach. Romeo Crennel is in his 5th season as defensive coordinator. Tim Kelly is in his 1st season as offensive coordinator, but it was the tight end coach. O'Brien had previously called the plays, but it's still the same scheme. They have that regularity, which again, as you know by now, that's very important to me in how I bet. Players don't have to learn new schemes except for their rookies. You have Watson, and he's just going to be more and more comfortable with his receivers, who are very, very good. You brought in Duke Johnson to balance Lamar Miller in the running game. So the big question for me is if their O-line can step up and if their secondary can be at least average, I think I really do believe this team can win 5 of their first 14 games. I really believe that. So I think, I don't know if Houston's going to win 11 this year again, but I think they can win 9. And I really believe they can win 9. I think that's a very solid bet. So I am buying the Houston Texans in 9 wins. I don't love them this year, but I love their leadership. I love that their coaches have been there a long time. Now, if they can win a couple of their first, 8 games, 9 games even, before their Week 10 bye, if they can go maybe 500 in their first 8, then absolutely. And I think they could, because they're a good team. They've got a good quarterback. They're the perfect team that builds around one of my strategies, the only 2 strategies that I believe work in regularly winning the Super Bowl or going to the playoffs. And that's either have a cheap young quarterback who you can build the team around, or a Hall of Fame quarterback. Now, every now and then, that isn't the case, and you have, say, the Philadelphia Eagles with Nick Foles. But remember, that season was mostly played by Carson Wentz, who was a cheap young quarterback at the time. Nick Foles is definitely not Hall of Fame. That sometimes things just come together and work. But look at New England. Obviously, Hall of Fame quarterback. L.A. Rams, cheap young quarterback. And you have that cheap young quarterback in Houston, who I believe has the talent to become a Hall of Fame quarterback. So you got the best of both worlds. You got a Hall of Fame pass rusher in J.J. Watt. You have a good defensive line, maybe a great defensive line, and a good coach. So I like them this year. I don't love them because of their schedule and their offensive line and their secondary, but I like them. I like them a lot at 9 wins. So absolutely, I am buying the Houston Texans. I think that's a good bet. It's not my favorite bet. It's not 100% certain, again, because of Andrew Luck, because of the schedule. But I feel comfortable, and I will bet the over. I will bet them to win 9 games. I am buying the Houston Texans. Now, the Texans, as we know, have a young quarterback who's still trying to prove it in the league. The next team, well, they've got a veteran quarterback who's trying to prove that he can stay healthy in the league. And of course, that's Andrew Luck and the Indianapolis Colts after this quick break. Indy, oh Indy, what do we make of you this season? They are such an unpredictable team. It's so hard to guess. They really came out of nowhere last year because they started off, I think, 1-5 and then ended up making the playoffs. I mean, they got hot, they gelled together, and they became a team. Now, that was behind Andrew Luck, who is one of my favorite quarterbacks, my favorite players in the entire NFL. I love Andrew Luck. I love Andrew Luck in Stanford. I remember I saw him make a play that I think there was a fumble, like his running back fumbled the ball, and the defender picked it up, and Andrew Luck just took the dude out, just hammered him. I mean, just clobbered him. I think he even knocked his helmet off. And I remember thinking, this is a guy I would want on my team. Now, that's Andrew Luck in a nutshell. I think he's a baller. He's a guy that everyone would want to play with and play for, but he's a guy that gets hurt, partly because of those types of hits. He doesn't have that instinct to get rid of the ball. Sometimes he gets hit harder than he should, or he goes and tackles guys. I mean, that's who he is, and I love that about him. I love him as a quarterback, but he's often hurt. He's missed sometimes entire seasons. He missed the entire 2017 season and then came back, and that was with a shoulder injury, and no one knew what was going to happen. He came back and led them to the playoffs, and they became one of the most dangerous and surprising teams in the NFL. And so they went 10-6 last year. And so you think, okay, well, heck, they've only gotten better. I mean, they had some really good drafts the last few years, and they added a couple guys like Devin Funchess to the offense and a couple guys to the defense, Houston as the defensive end. And so everyone's like, okay, you got to buy. Obviously, you're buying the Colts. I mean, they've literally only gotten to be a better team. Now, obviously, the problem is that Andrew Luck, again, has gotten hurt. The biggest problem is no one, and I mean no one, knows what's wrong. The owner, I was going to say Bill Polian. He was a GM. Jim Irsay. He came out and said something about it being a bone issue when all the doctors have been saying it's like a calf issue or it's in his calf somewhere, which is like, yeah, I don't think that really works. It's got to be one or the other, of course. So no one really knows what's going on with Andrew Luck. Everyone hopes he's going to be ready for week 1, but it's a total guess. So I would almost stay away from the Indianapolis Colts until we know if he's going to play. Now, that being said, right now Tipico has them at 9.5 wins, and that being the case, that's a low win percentage for me. They could be one of the best teams in the NFL with Andrew Luck. So this is a good time to buy them if you think Andrew Luck is going to be healthy. I don't know if I would do it, but if I was going to take a flyer on a team, I would take it on Indianapolis Colts. They're right now also 17-1 to win the Super Bowl. I love that bet. I love it. I think this team has everything they need. They have a good defense. It's not a great defense. It's a good defense. And they have a great offense with Andrew Luck. I mean, they have Hilton and Funchess at wide receiver, Ebron at tight end. They've got Mack and Hines at running back. They have the 5th best offensive line according to Pro Football Focus in 2019, even though that came from nowhere. They were one of the worst offensive lines in 2017, and they just somehow fixed it. So I don't know if that's head coach Frank Reich, who is he's a former NFL player, and I think he was the offensive coordinator, I believe, with the Philadelphia Eagles. And I think he may have been the Philadelphia Eagles offensive coordinator when they won the Super Bowl. I should have looked that up. That's terrible of me, but I think that was the case. And so anyway, he was a guy who obviously has had some success, and he came in and just after a few games that were total garbage, he put the team together and they rallied behind him and rallied around Andrew Luck. And I think Andrew Luck is a guy that, like we said with Deshaun Watson, people want to win for. They want to play for. I don't think he's as vocal as some of these leaders, but I think he's just such a likable dude. I mean, he's kind of this, yokel, but I say that in a loving way. I mean, I think he's a very lovable yokel. He's this kind of this redneck guy, but he's awesome. I love Andrew Luck. He really is. I'd say of all the players in the NFL, 2 of my absolute favorites are Andrew Luck and Deshaun Watson. I love their characters. I love who they are off the field, on the field. I love what they do. And I really hope that Andrew Luck is healthy this season. And I hope that he can stay healthy. I hope he can stay healthy for the rest of his career, because when he came in, as we all know, he was supposed to be the next guy. He was supposed to be the next guy to take over for Peyton Manning and Tom Brady and Drew Brees and all these guys who are going to retire. And his health has just not allowed him to do it. And I hope that changes. I hope that he can turn that corner and become a guy who's going to be consistently healthy. And if he does, watch out for this team. Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. Because you have guys who are, it's the same scheme. Nick Sirianni will be the offensive coordinator again. Matt Eberflus is the defensive coordinator again. They've both been there now in their second year. So it's a recognizable scheme. They've added weapons. They brought in Funchess. They brought in a rookie wide receiver who's very good as well, or very highly respected. And They do have a tough schedule, but I do believe that though the AFC South is a tough division in 2019, I think it is a winnable division. I don't think Tennessee's going to be very good. I don't think that Jacksonville is going to be very good. So I think really you're going up against the Texans. And if the Colts are healthy, they can beat anyone. They really can. I believe this is a team that can beat anyone. And a lot of that is around the offensive line, the scheme, and the quarterback. And they start the season at the LA Chargers, and then at Tennessee, at home against Atlanta, at home against Oakland, and at Kansas City. That's pretty tough. But it's not impossible. And then it gets a little easier. They have a bye, and then at home against Houston, at home against Denver, at Pittsburgh. That's still pretty tough. And then at home against Miami, at home against Jacksonville, at Houston, at home against Tennessee, at Tampa Bay, at New Orleans, at home against Carolina, and at Jacksonville. That's a winnable schedule. Couple tough games, of course. But considering that they are ranked by CBSSports.com as the 7th toughest schedule, I think that's a decent schedule considering it as the 7th toughest. It's not easy, but it's winnable. And so since Typical has them at 9.5, if you're a gambler, which I assume most of you are, this is a buy for me. This is a buy because this is the best moment to bet on the Colts because as soon as Andrew Luck gets healthy, that's going to go up at least a win. I think almost for sure. They'll put that to 10.5. So this is a good time to bet it. And it's a really good time to bet them to win the AFC or to win the Super Bowl. Again, 17-1 odds to win the Super Bowl. I think that's a very solid bet. Now, you're not getting amazing odds, but heck, go put $10 on that, Why not? I mean, this is a team that has the talent to go. The AFC is potentially winnable. Now, there are going to be some good teams, especially coming out of the AFC West. But, maybe it's finally New England's time to not dominate the AFC. I think that they're going to dominate their division, but I think New England's going to start being beatable. Now, I do say that every year, and then they are completely unbeatable. So maybe, I'll watch what I say. But for all the teams, the yearly record, 9.5, it's a solid bet. It's a risk. But I really do like the Super Bowl bet because I think Andrew Luck will come back. He will be healthy, and then they will play as a very good team. So even if they go into the playoffs at say 9-7 as a wild card, even 10-6, let's say, they're going to be dangerous. They're going to be dangerous in the playoffs, and they could take that next step. I think they got the staff, the coaching staff, the quarterback, offensive line. There aren't too many big weaknesses on this team. And that's the kind of team that takes it a long way. So Indianapolis Colts, I'm an okay buy. I'm a uninspired buy on the 9.5, but I am a buy for the 17-1 odds to win the Super Bowl. Again, because of all of the depth, their quarterback, their coaches, and their offensive line. So that's what I've got for the AFC East. To wrap it up, I am really pushing on the Titans. I just wouldn't bet the Titans. They're too unpredictable. They're too whelming, as we would say. They're right in the middle and hard to really predict what they're going to do, if they're going to win more than 8 or if they're going to win, or if they're going to win 9 or more or 8 and less. I don't know. I think they'll be around 8-8. So don't bet on Tennessee either way, in my opinion. The Jaguars, I have as a sell. I don't think they're going to win 8 games or 9 games or more. So I think absolutely you can bet the under on that. I think that's a very solid bet, honestly. The Houston Texans, I am also buying, though. I'm actually buying. They're the first buy, I should say. They're my first buy to win more than 8 games. I think they'll win 9 or 10, depending on the health of Andrew Luck, I think. And then the Indianapolis Colts, they're, a slight buy for their record and a big buy for their 17-1 odds to win the Super Bowl. That's what I've got for the bets for this week, the AFC South. If anyone has any questions, concerns, if I made any mistakes, which is always possible, please find me on Twitter at Kevy Gillikin. That's KEVVYGILLIKIN on Twitter. Comment, yell at me, whatever you want to do. Also, share this podcast wherever you can. Download it, subscribe, etc. I'll be doing every single division in the NFL before the start of the regular season. As the regular season starts, we will go and bet every single game against the spread. And again, focusing on the human element, the injuries, the travel, the coaching staff, etc. So this is the place to find all of that information when the season finally starts, which cannot come soon enough. I'm sure you all agree. Okay, one more quick break, and then we'll go quickly over the players I believe who will have an impact or not have an impact in fantasy in the AFC West, and we will wrap up the show. And next show will be on the AFC West. All right, last segment, we're going to talk about fantasy. Again, during the regular season, we're going to focus more on daily fantasy and say who I like that week due to the human element. Now, obviously, we're not going to do that because we're in the preseason, so we'll focus more on guys that you should pay attention to for yearly fantasy football, and guys in the AFC South. Now, obviously, the biggest question in terms of the quarterback position is Andrew Luck. He's an interesting one. I actually like buying him. Now, don't buy him too high. Again, this is all in terms of ADP and where you draft guys and how your team is set up. As everyone knows, that's the deal with fantasy. So this is purely subjective and purely guys that I would be interested in having on my team if you pick them at the right position. So Andrew Luck, he's probably going to fall because people are worried he's going to miss a few games. Now, I'm a risk taker because I think that Andrew Luck is worth a high draft pick in terms of quarterback at least, and then you go and you draft some stinker in the late round, say Sam Darnold or Ryan Fitzpatrick would be a perfect one. And if Andrew Luck gets hurt, or if he remains hurt and doesn't play the first few games, then you have someone to cover for him. But I don't think he's going to be out more than the first few weeks, or at least I hope he shouldn't be. And he could start every game, so he's probably going to draft. He's going to drop in the ADP. The average draft position, that is. And if that's the case, I'd pick him up. I will pick him up. If he's available, I've got my eye totally on Andrew Luck because he's probably going to drop, and he could still even play every single game. So I'm high on Luck. I'd say pick him. Lamar Miller is one to totally be scared to death of because Duke Johnson came in, and I think that they're likely going to be a two-headed monster. I don't know that for sure, but it seems like a situation where that absolutely could be the case. And since the offensive line in itself is still not very good, I would not draft either of them really anywhere. Now, if Miller drops way down in the draft, okay, maybe, but just stay away from him. Just stay away. Ty Hilton is another risk because obviously he plays much better with Andrew Luck than he does with any other quarterback. Again, if he's a guy who starts to fall because people are worried, I'd pick him up. He's worth the risk. He's talented enough, and when he plays with Luck, he is absolutely a bombshell receiver. So T.Y. Hilton, be wary about him. Know that he's a risk, but I think he's a risk worth taking. So I'm also buying T.Y. Hilton again in the right position. Now, the guy that I really like that I think has fallen every time I've done a mock draft, and I've been surprised how far he's fallen, is Derrick Henry with the Titans. That's a good offensive line. It's a scheme that's likely going to try to get him balls, out of the backfield as well. And he's a guy who should score touchdowns. Should. He's going to get a lot of carries. So if he stays healthy, which there's no reason to think he shouldn't, he's going to be a very good running back and an undervalued running back. So right now he's valued, I think this is by Yahoo, as a 15th running back in fantasy. I think he should go higher than that. I mean, I think he should be above a lot of these guys, maybe I think Marlon Mack and Damian Williams in Kansas City. I think he was below them, and I think he absolutely has a higher ceiling than those guys this season, especially Damian Williams. So Derrick Henry, absolutely. I think he is the guy to pay attention to out of this entire division. He's the guy that is falling and that shouldn't be falling, a guy that you could get some really good value with Derrick Henry. Now, as far as the Jaguars, there's really no one on that team that really impresses me. Their receivers aren't that impressive, and Leonard Fournette is always hurt. He's never really put up the numbers everyone expects him to. So I'm a sell on Fournette, but that's not saying much. I think most people are. So yeah, in the long run, I would just not touch anyone on the Jacksonville Jaguars team. Maybe Foles or Fournette with a very late round pick. That's all I got for you. I'll see you next show for, again, the AFC West, which I'm very excited about as a Broncos fan myself. I'm really excited to get into this and dig into the AFC West, which is, again, going to be a very, very good division where the Broncos will probably be the worst team and could likely go 8-8 or perhaps 9-7. Going to be a brutal division, and I can't wait to talk about it in our next show. Stay tuned. Always watch out on Twitter and subscribe wherever you can to the Footballogists. Until then.